The rain had been falling since morning, turning the narrow streets into long rivers of gray water. People hurried past with umbrellas and hurried steps, their eyes fixed on their phones or the path ahead. No one wanted to get wet, no one wanted to stop, and certainly no one wanted to notice the small shape lying beside the broken curb. It was a thin brown dog, her fur soaked and clinging to her ribs, her body trembling with exhaustion. She had once been strong, once able to run through fields and bark at butterflies, but those days felt like distant dreams. Now she was simply a stray mother dog, hungry and weak, curled protectively around a tiny puppy who pressed his small body against her side for warmth. The puppy was barely old enough to walk. His legs were short and shaky, and his fur was still soft like cotton. He didn't understand the world yet. He didn't understand why people passed by without looking, why cars splashed muddy water near them, or why his mother's breathing had become slow and heavy. All he knew was that his mother was everything. She was warmth, safety, food, and love. So he stayed close, pressing his nose into her neck, whining softly whenever she didn't move. Throughout the day, hundreds of people passed them. Some noticed but quickly looked away. A man in a suit stepped over them as if they were nothing more than trash on the street. A group of teenagers laughed as they hurried past, their music loud in their ears. A woman pushing a stroller glanced at the dog and puppy but shook her head and continued walking. Everyone had somewhere to go, something to do, and no time to help. The mother dog tried to lift her head several times, hoping someone might stop. Her eyes were tired but still filled with a quiet plea. She had lived long enough to know that sometimes humans were kind. Sometimes they offered scraps of food or a gentle pat. But today no one slowed down. No one stopped. As evening began to fall, the rain grew heavier. Water dripped from the rusted roof of an old shop nearby, creating a steady rhythm against the pavement. The puppy shivered, his tiny body struggling against the cold. He looked up at his mother again and nudged her gently. She didn't respond right away. Her breathing had become shallow, and every movement seemed to take great effort. The puppy whimpered. It was a small, fragile sound, almost lost beneath the noise of the rain and the traffic. But to him it felt loud and desperate. He licked his mother's face again and again, trying to wake her, trying to make her stand up like she always did. Finally, after several moments, she opened her eyes slightly and looked at him. Her gaze was soft and loving, but also tired, as if she was fighting a battle she was slowly losing. For a moment she tried to rise. Her legs trembled beneath her weight, and she managed to lift herself a few inches from the ground before collapsing again. The effort seemed to drain the last of her strength. She rested her head on the pavement, her eyes half closed. The puppy didn't understand what was happening. He pawed at her gently, whining louder now. But the street remained busy and indifferent. Cars rushed past. Footsteps echoed against the wet pavement. Life moved on around them, ignoring the small tragedy unfolding beside the curb. Then something inside the puppy changed. He had always stayed close to his mother, never straying more than a few steps away. But now he looked up at the endless stream of people walking by and realized something in his tiny heart. If no one stopped, his mother might never get up again. So the puppy did something no one expected. He stepped away from his mother and walked toward the middle of the sidewalk. His legs were shaky, and each step looked uncertain, but his eyes were focused. A man walking quickly nearly bumped into him and muttered something under his breath before moving around him. Another person stepped over the small puppy without slowing down. But the puppy didn't give up. He stood in the path of strangers and barked. It wasn't a strong bark, it was more like a high-pitched squeak. Yet he barked again and again, looking up at every face that passed. Some people glanced down for a moment, puzzled, before continuing on their way. After several minutes, the puppy ran back to his mother and nudged her again. She barely moved. Panic spread through his tiny body. He ran back toward the crowd once more, barking louder now, almost pleading. A cyclist riding too fast suddenly swerved to avoid the puppy, nearly crashing. He shouted angrily before riding away. The puppy didn't understand the anger. All he knew was that he had to make someone notice. The rain soaked him completely now. His small body shivered violently, but he continued to move back and forth between the sidewalk and his mother, barking at strangers and then returning to check on her. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Finally, something unexpected happened. A young woman walking home from work noticed the small puppy standing directly in front of her shoes. She stopped, surprised. The puppy barked once, then turned and ran a few steps away before looking back at her. At first she thought he was just a playful stray. But then she noticed the urgency in his movement. He ran toward the curb, then looked back again, barking softly. Curious and slightly concerned, the woman followed him. When she reached the curb and saw the mother dog lying motionless on the wet pavement, her heart dropped. The dog looked thin and exhausted, her body barely rising with each breath. "Oh no," the woman whispered. The puppy immediately ran to his mother and began licking her face again, as if trying to show the woman exactly what was wrong. His small tail wagged nervously, and his eyes looked up at her with desperate hope. For a moment the woman simply stood there, shocked by the scene. The rain soaked her coat, but she barely noticed. She knelt down slowly and gently touched the mother dog's side. The dog flinched slightly but didn't move much. "She's alive," the woman murmured softly. The puppy barked again, almost as if he understood her words. The woman looked around the street, suddenly aware that dozens of people were still walking past without stopping. She felt a mixture of sadness and determination. She couldn't just leave them there. She quickly pulled out her phone and called a nearby animal rescue center. Her voice trembled slightly as she explained the situation: a weak mother dog, a desperate puppy, and heavy rain making everything worse. The rescue worker on the phone promised they would send a vehicle as quickly as possible. While she waited, the woman removed her scarf and gently placed it over the mother dog to keep her warm. The puppy sniffed the scarf curiously before curling up beside his mother again. The minutes that followed felt long and quiet. The rain slowly softened, turning into a light drizzle. The woman stayed beside the dogs the entire time, occasionally whispering soft words even though she knew they probably didn't understand. But the puppy seemed to understand something important: someone had finally stopped. Someone finally cared. When the rescue van arrived about 20 minutes later, two volunteers quickly stepped out and approached the scene. They carefully lifted the mother dog onto a soft blanket and carried her into the vehicle. The puppy barked anxiously at first, but when the woman gently picked him up and placed him beside his mother, he relaxed. The rescue workers explained that the mother dog was extremely weak but still had a chance if they acted quickly. They thanked the woman for calling and for staying with the animals. As the van doors closed, the puppy pressed himself against his mother once more. For the first time that day, he seemed calm. His tiny act of courage had finally worked. Someone had noticed. Someone had helped. The rescue center spent the next several days caring for the mother dog. She was dehydrated, malnourished, and exhausted, but slowly she began to recover. The puppy never left her side during that time. Whenever she slept, he curled up beside her. Whenever she woke, he wagged his tail with pure joy. The volunteers at the rescue center couldn't stop talking about the little puppy who had practically dragged a human to save his mother. His bravery amazed everyone who heard the story. Eventually the mother dog regained enough strength to stand again. Her eyes looked brighter, and her tail began to wag gently whenever she saw her puppy playing nearby. A few weeks later, the young woman who had stopped in the rain returned to the rescue center. She had been thinking about the dogs every day since that night. When she saw the puppy run toward her with excited barks, she knew immediately what she wanted to do. She decided to adopt both of them. The volunteers smiled as they watched the small family leave together. The mother dog walked slowly but proudly beside the woman, while the puppy trotted happily ahead, his tiny tail wagging non-stop. No one had stopped that day when the mother lay helpless in the rain. The street had been full of people, yet empty of kindness. But one tiny puppy refused to give up. And because of his courage, his mother lived, a stranger found two new companions, and the world became just a little bit kinder than it had been before.